Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another live recording of Should I Start a Podcast? Today, we have Mick Hawes in the house, who is a legend who's been in the game of performance and coaching for 30 years. We're going to get his story, but if you want the edited version of this show, you'll find it on Should I Start a Podcast and all your favorite podcast, well, depending on where you find them, your favorite podcast hosting platform, I suppose. And, you know, we've got a whole bunch of really cool podcast episodes that have just been released, so go check that out. And also, if you're a business owner and a podcaster and have a case study on how a business has helped or hindered your business, how a podcast has helped or hindered your business, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to see if we could feature you on the show. So DM me, and I'd love to sort of get into that. If you disagree or agree with anything that we talk about on this show, I'd be keen for you to put a comment in wherever you're watching this, whether it's on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, or any of the social platforms. But today we're going to talk with Mick. And Mick, as I call him, is a reluctant podcaster, and I think he might agree with that when he sort of comes on the show. But he has been through different routes as a podcaster, and I'm keen to get the story. But he has seen a lot of businesses fail. He's seen a lot of businesses succeed, and he's been doing this for 30 years. So I'm keen to get him on the show and hear his story. Mick, how are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing excellent, thanks.
Oh my God, you've got a nice microphone there.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Most people suffer from microphone envy.
Yes, they should.
Yeah, Earthworks ethos, if anyone wants to get themselves one.
Thank you for helping them grow, I suppose. I am keen to get started with like the first business you had. What was that first business, and how did you get clients to that business?
Well, I suppose the first time I worked for myself, I woke up one day and I'm sure most people have had this experience where you wake up and you just have this overwhelming urge to sell life insurance. And so I went and did that. And that kind of got me started on the path of personal development and all that. And our first business that we started was actually a training business, and it was really hard to get clients back then because obviously you don't know what you're doing, and you're just kind of door knocking and cold calling, and you don't really have a niche, and you don't really understand what your potential clients are looking for. So you're kind of selling yourself and all of that sort of stuff, doing pretty much everything wrong. So it's quite difficult, but over the 30 years of doing this, you know, I guess we've come to the conclusion that you do need to have a niche. You do need to understand the fears, frustrations, wants and aspirations of your ideal client. And you need the content that you put out needs to resonate and enter into the conversation that your ideal prospects, if you like, are already having. And you know, in that sentence or a couple of sentences, that's what I've learned in 30 years.
Which is supposed to be the basics of business. But when you go back to your selling days, knocking on doors and not knowing your niche, but obviously at some point making some sort of sale, what was working back then? Like what converted? What worked?
Back then, because it was face to face. Like there was no social media to speak of. So it was relationships. And I guess nothing's changed, just the medium has changed, but it was just relationships, getting to know people, getting them to know that you were genuine and you had their best interests at heart, and just developing relationships. But back then, as I said, it was face to face. Today it's potentially a little more electronic, but I don't think anything's changed.
Interesting. I mean, so it's basically about building trust, and that's the name of the game. So you've been doing this for 30 years. You help builders build successful businesses, and you coach them to do that. Let's talk about some of the bad recommendations you hear in your profession. What What comes to mind?
Um, in our industry, there's a big focus on that you can't quote for free. Sorry, you can't charge for quotes. We teach all our guys that you need to get paid for putting that together and teach them how to do that. But the recommendations are you won't get business if you do things if you charge for things that people previously have paid for, have gotten for free, and the other recommendation is that everyone makes decisions based on price. And in my world, there's nothing further from the truth. Statistically, I believe that it's like 80% of people want value, and 20% of the people are making decisions based on price. My personal opinion is those other 20% make decisions based on value as well. They talk about price, but it's like in their mind, when everything lines up, they feel they're getting value, so they go ahead. So in my mind, it's all about value. It's never about price. But they're the recommendations.
So, when you're talking about what people are people kind of sort of start talking about price or competing on price when they don't really understand the value that they're getting, or they kind of only feel like it's a like for like, right? If I have a couple of restaurants in a row and they're both selling, I don't know, spaghetti bolognese, and there's nowhere to tell the difference, you're going to choose the cheapest one in that instance. But so I think as business owners, maybe actually, because you're saying all these things, I wrote a quote down this morning or yesterday that read, "Art is not what you see, but what you make others see." So to your point, maybe as business owners, we got to learn how we can make others see our art. What in your experience has made that work? Like, how do people understand when you're trying to explain them in a sales conversation, like, this is my art? What are the best ways to communicate that?
From their perspective, I think it always needs to be from their perspective. There are many things, and I'm going to need to talk from a builder's perspective because they're
Please.
the people we talk to all of the time.
Please.
The issue is that the builder is generally completely unaware of what their clients' desires and concerns are. They think they know them, but they don't. And so the value that they put towards their client and their prospect represents value to them, the builder. I'm doing all of these things for you. I'll do this, and we'll use that, and we'll get these sort of people, and we'll use this technique, and all of this sort of stuff that represents value to the builder. But the reality is that the client doesn't even know about it. Probably if they knew about it, they wouldn't care about it. But what they do care about is when the builder understands what are your concerns, what are you afraid of, what are you frustrated with, what are you scared of, and the beauty of just learning how to do this, or enter into this conversation where you are feeding back their fears, frustrations, wants, and aspirations to them, so they feel that you understand from their perspective equally as well, perhaps even better than they understand it themselves. There's a massive trust building exercise going on then. They lower their defenses because, from a client's point of view, most of them think that, builders are already making too much money. They're going to rip me off. If I tell them what my budget is, they'll use it against me. All of this sort of stuff. And that might be true in some small parts of the industry, but by and large, it's not true. And by being open and honest and working together as a team, you're always going to get the best result.
Yeah.
So, it all comes down to understanding from their perspective and having them feel that you understand from their perspective.
That's such a big point that you bring up, and I think it's like that's why reason I kind of went down this path, I not knowing where it would go, but it's such an important point because we do all these things for our clients with the good intention of like, you don't understand what is happening here, like how much I'm giving you here, and they in return don't understand that. And this was like 2016, and we were having all these issues in Amplify with some complaints from clients and stuff. And I remember Rochelle, my wife, saying to me, she's like, "Do your clients know what you do for them?" And I said, "What do you mean?" "Of course, I mean I make the podcast." And she's like, "No, as in like what you do every week for that podcast." And I was like, oh, I don't even know myself necessarily to be able to give them a list. So I literally, on a brown piece of paper, like the one I have right now here, I kind of like just made a list of the things that we did. 72 different things every week. And then I just literally clicked a picture and sent that picture to all their clients. And then they said things like, "Oh, I'm so sorry that I moved the schedule around. I didn't know exactly what was happening." But they didn't know because I didn't really explain to them. And I think you take that one step further, which we get wrong, is like, okay, even though I'm doing all these things, you might not even care that these things need to happen. So how do you like take that into your content? How do you create content for your people?
If that's your, if you believe in what I just said, that's the first hurdle. Like you've got to believe that. But then you, when you represent those activities, those actions that you're taking for your client, when you're communicating what you're doing for them, it always has to be communicated in a way that they see the old, WWIFM, what's in it for me. They need to, it needs to be expressed and communicated in a way that front and center is the value for them. How does it protect them? How does it support them? How does it guide them? How does it make their life better? How does it deliver value? Rather than we do this. So, we do all of this editing and we do, whatever you do in Amplify.
Mm-hmm.
What is the specific value point from their perspective that they experience because you perform that activity is the way that it needs to be explained. And so, for example, with our builders, most people are used to getting a builder around, here's my plans, do a quote, it's for free. And so you're up against it when you go, well, there's a fee for that. And they're going, but I can get 10 other builders to do it for nothing. So you've got to be able to communicate the value of what you're doing from their perspective so it makes sense to pay. And that's kind of a big ask. And one of the things that I suggest, if anybody, listening to this has this issue, is I use the analogy, and you brought up the restaurants. You go to your favorite restaurant. Everyone has a favorite restaurant. You go there twice a week. Everyone knows you're there. Good food, all of that sort of stuff. And you turn up one week and the prices are 30% higher. Nothing's changed. You'll probably get the shits about that. But if you went there one day and they said, "Mr. Vaz, we're so glad that you're here. We've got some exciting news for you and we're really looking forward to what you've got to say at the end of the evening. We've revamped the place. We've got new furniture. The chef's been out sourcing all of this incredible organic produce. He's rewritten the menu. We've got this dude that matches the wine with the food. We've got entertainment in the corner. We've changed the lighting. The whole ambiance is significantly different. And we cannot wait for you to tell us of your experience at the end of the evening." And you look on the menu, and it is all different, and it's 30% dearer than it used to be. You don't even blink because you've had such a different experience. You can't charge you can't charge more for the same menu. You've got to change the menu. You've got to change the experience.
Yeah.
Then you can charge appropriately, and they go, fair enough.
And I think maybe the issue in general in business is that we don't have the imagination, or we don't have the experience to have the imagination on how to change that, right? So for example, I mean, I started a restaurant as in like, so when I first had the idea, like, okay, I'm not a 9 to 5, I'm a business person. I kind of went the route that most business owners kind of go is like, okay, everyone's got to eat. I'm starting a restaurant or a cafe or something to that effect. Not, I mean, even though people have told us and told me at the time on the stats, you know, you're super optimistic about everything, and and I think that the imagination wasn't there. Like, how else could I deliver what people said was my passion? Like, you know, like how else could you deliver that? You can only think of a restaurant. So do you think that that is probably the primary issue, that people can't even imagine doing it differently?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of just get hypnotized into thinking that when we look around, there's safety in numbers, like we're taught that, all of those sorts of things as we grow up, and we just look around and see what the majority are doing, and that gives us confidence and certainty in what we're doing is right. And so it, in my view, that really is destructive to your imagination, because you don't need to disrupt. You don't need to do anything different, because do what the majority do. That's the way we roll. But you know, I just love things like I'll probably misquote him, but you know, Walt Disney, I believe, said, you know, if you want to be successful in any area of life, look around and see what the world is doing and don't do it. You know, Tony Robbins taught me that, you know, you look around and see what the majority are doing, how they're doing it, and it's a good bet. A good place to start is to do the opposite, and you'll probably be successful.
Yeah, I've heard that multiple times, and I think maybe done that unconsciously, really. But I do feel the emotional safety when I do something and someone else is doing it as well. Like, I do feel like, I do feel amazing when I'm the first person to start something, but then I kind of go, wait, is this right? Like, really worth it? Or like, you know, because you're in the excitement's over and you're trying to have to sell this idea to the market because it's never existed before. And I think maybe people, because they don't like selling necessarily, is probably something that, which is crazy, because today's mistake that I want to talk about is number 60. It's called selling services your audience does not want, or only selling one way to work with you. So I wonder whether selling is such an important part of business in general that I wanted to cover that first before we went to the content, because, you know, you could create the best content or the best podcast or the best business development tool if your conversion into sales, whether it is selling for sponsors on your podcast or selling for clients or selling for more books or whatever it might be, selling for your brand, all that needs to be achieved. Some sort of selling needs to happen. And do you think that business owners kind of get into this kind of feeling that they are not going to sell anymore because now they have a podcast, or now they have a book, or now they have a blog, or now they have a video channel?
Yeah, I get a sense that the majority of people feel that selling has a icky, nasty reputation anyway, so they can come up with all sorts of reasons as to not do it. But at the end of the day, there isn't a business until and unless a sale is made. So, you know, we need to sell in every business. And I think it's a bit of a mistake when you think that if my product or my service is good enough, it will sell itself. I think that there's a lot of businesses that have gone broke with amazing products and amazing services. And I can understand it, because I went through that myself years and years and years ago. I remember it like it was yesterday, having a conversation with a buddy of mine at Sydney Airport, and he was suggesting that I go into a sales role. At that point, I was just finished being a professional musician. I was working in a musical shop, and I was a professional sound engineer and all of this sort of thing. And he suggested going into sales, and I just reeled in terror and disgust, as if I would do that, I'd be awful and all that sort of stuff. And now I kind of teach it.
Yeah.
And I think it's the most important skill that we have in life, because every time we get into a discussion with somebody, there's a sale that needs to be made. If I have a disagreement with somebody, or I want to change somebody's perception of something to benefit them even, I'm selling a difference of opinion. So you've got to understand how the sales process works. And I think some of the best stuff I've learned is that all selling is creating trust and transferring a feeling or transferring an emotion. And what I mean by that is going full circle to what you said a little while ago. It's all about trust. And I'm in the Whamily, and you messaged me and you said you should join this. And and I've never told you this before, so I'm just being completely transparent. I didn't know what you're talking about.
Interesting.
You said something about podcast and something about something else, and I went, yeah. And honestly, all I thought was, if Ron's reckons it's a good idea for me to be in this group, I'll just jump in and I'll figure it out as I'm going along.
Wow.
And it was great. But my point is that you made the sale because we had an incredible level of trust. You didn't. You probably told me the benefits or whatever, but
you don't
I wasn't
remember.
listening.
Yeah, you don't remember. So let's talk about what you were listening to and what you heard. Right. So what has been your podcast journey? When did you start? Because you've done a few reps in terms of recordings and even publishing. What has that journey been like, and where are you at now?
I started doing a podcast maybe 12 years ago or something, 10 years ago, and just got so sucked into the production of it and finding the guests and sponsors and all of this sort of stuff. And I was with an American company, so my business was in Australia, but there was an American podcast company that I was with, and they would promote it and syndicate it all through the United States. And we were getting, thousands and thousands and thousands of downloads every week. And it didn't help my business a bit, not at all, because everyone was in the United States and we were here. And it took me a whole year to go, well, hang on, what am I doing? This is crazy. And I've had a few attempts at podcasting since, and then I joined the Whamily, and then it started to make sense to really understand your purpose for the podcast. And
I want to pause you for the second there, because you said Whamily a few times. So for people that are watching this wherever they are, Whamily is the short form for we are podcast members. So Whamily, we are members, and family has been merged and it's made a Whamily, and that's how that became a thing. So this is we are podcast members that Mick is talking about. It's like an inside lingo, because he's been around since day one. He's just part of the furniture now. So for everyone listening, that's what Whamily is. Sorry, Mick, go on.
That's quite okay. So being part of that group, it really cleared up the purpose, and when you've got the purpose, it makes all of the work that needs to be done to pull a podcast together so worth it. And as we speak now, the podcast is such a central pillar of the success of our business, because it creates that connection, that trust. Every person that comes along that is a prospect to our company, which is the Builders Business Black Belt, coaching the builders and other trades-based businesses, without being asked, they all volunteer. I've been listening to the podcast. I love what's going on in the podcast. And it's such a central part of the success of the current business, by building that trust and rapport before we even get to meet them. So, I can't recommend it highly enough. We're about to launch into a second podcast, and and we had a session the other day, and I got, there's so much I need to learn. I thought I knew what I was doing, and it turns out I don't.
But
But it's been successful. That's the most important thing to get across to people.
it's
You do the podcast anyway.
it's fascinating to hear your background, and in terms of how technical you actually are in all things audio, and still are humble enough to kind of go, I don't know a lot of other things. And I would say that there are a lot of other people in the audio industry who kind of go, I know podcasting because I've been, a tech person for a long time, or I can interview because I do interviews with my clients all the time, or whatever the thing is. And I feel that's probably been the biggest highlight for me when it comes to you, is like you're constantly in this learning phase, which is so cool. What are some of the results that you've gotten directly from the podcast for your business? Like, what are some of the things that you can like say, well, this is a direct result of having the podcast?
Well, right now it's simply lead generation. We've built a community. We've built our own, or got our own app built, called the Tool Shed, and we attract builders in there. And the podcast is the single most influential part of that environment that causes people to have a conversation with us and look at joining our paid programs. So it's the most central part of our business. And yeah, I can't sort of emphasize how important and how powerful it is. And then the other thing that I've learnt through this journey as well is you just said to be open and always learning, and you called me one time and said your builders need to be doing podcasts, and I said, I think you're barking up the wrong tree there, old fella. Builders won't do a podcast, and I introduced it. Like you gave me some reasons as to why it would be a good idea. Again, the trust factor kicked in. And I mentioned it to some of our members who took up the mantle, created their own podcast, got together, did a joint podcast or whatever. And their feedback is exactly the same. They said they can't believe how many problems it's gotten rid of in their building business, because when they meet their prospect for the first time, their prospects have this really high level of trust and say things like, I feel like I've known you for a long time. I feel like I've known you forever, because they've seen you and heard you in the podcast, and you've already created that connection, the trust, the rapport. And that's so profound. I mean, how much does it cost to get a client into your business these days? And if you can have a resource in your business that just rips down all of those walls of suspicion and distrust, so you can just have a proper conversation about what their problem is and will your solution suit their problem. It saves time, it saves effort. They have a much better experience. I mean, it's just a horrible experience for a consumer trying to find their way to find the right service provider or the right product to fix their problem.
Yeah.
It's not great being a consumer, but when you can find somebody who you really, really trust and can guide you, it's wonderful. And the podcast can do that for you.
Like, I've been saying this, for 10 years now, which is crazy, that I've never seen a better business development tool than a podcast, because everyone thinks, I suppose, that it's a content creation tool or it's like a marketing tool, but it's not. It is actually a business development tool. And if you use it correctly, you can not only get a better insight on your market, but you can get access to the real people who have your clients, which is what you want, right? I mean, it's never been a better time for that to happen. And I'm curious to know about your podcast and how does that new one, what's your plan with the new one? What's that? What is your idea around creating another one now?
Yeah. Again, just demonstrating that I am one of the slowest learners you'll ever meet. The other podcast for 100 years. And just this week, the penny dropped that, right. So what you're saying is have a podcast and interview people who have your clients and you have no competitive overlap and tap into their circles of influence and promote yourself that way. What a concept. What an amazing concept you've just taught me, Ronsley.
You know, I find that crazy because I feel like I've been saying that the whole time, but I just think that maybe I've not been saying it the right way the whole time. Because now on this trip, over the last few, maybe past few weeks, like going around America and having these conversations, and I tell people exactly that, why don't you do this? And they're like, have you written a book on this? I'm like, no, but isn't this how normally someone would start a podcast? And they're like, no one knows these things. And maybe I've been explaining it wrong. So what I'd love for you to kind of explain back to me is like, what did you understand from what I said, and how has the penny dropped? What made sense?
I understood what you were saying from the first time you said it. I just didn't necessarily agree that that was what I needed to do. And I think I had the blinkers on and I couldn't see the vision. And I was using it, the current podcast, purely as a tool to create authority. So the people that came into our app and were listening to the podcast would get a sense that I knew what I was talking about. And I think the reality of the situation is we just put a new team member on. His name's Scott, and he has really, really challenged my approach and my mindset to leadership, because you bring somebody in to your team and you think you know what the best way of moving forward is, and you want them to follow your instruction as to what we should be doing from now on. And he kind of hasn't listened to that and has just gone in a completely different direction, creating bigger conversations with exactly the people that you're talking about. And he said, we need to interview these people. At the same time, as I was on that coaching session, when you were talking about it to me for, I don't know, the 50th time, maybe.
That's interesting.
And it all just fell into place and made sense. And I mean, it was good. I didn't have that, I wish I had listened to Ron's earlier experience. It was just, okay, now's the time. I'm good. Let's go for it.
Amazing.
This all makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I love that when you after something like the speed at which you go at it. So let's talk about what you're doing and how, for your instance, like talk about who your audience is, and then how you're structuring the podcast to get a client, and then what's happening when all that happens. Like, just explain or break down the whole model for us.
Yeah. So currently we're getting into conversations with other bigger organizations who have a focus on helping people in the construction industry with mental health. And over the last half a year or something, that's been the blinding flash of the obvious for us as well. Like, we've got an amazing coaching program that has helped builders. One of them called me just 2 weeks ago, and he's only been with us 2 years, implemented the Profit First system after he started with us. And throughout, the COVID epidemic, this particular builder has put $1 million of cash in the profit account. Wow. Which is an amazing outcome.
Yeah.
But the reason I said that is just to give you some sort of evidence that we know what we're talking about. We do good results. But that the stuff that we teach needs to be put into practice. And if you have so much distress and your mental health is suffering that you can't really give time or attention to the stuff that's going to help you build a better business, nothing happens. So our coaching program is fundamentally worthless until and unless we address the mental health issues, and they're massive in the building industry, in the construction industry. So we're now having conversations with these larger organizations about how we can come together to help people in the industry address the mental health challenges, because it is massive. One of the biggest house building companies just a few months ago, I think they had like 2,000 houses in the ground at the time, and the owner of that organization killed himself.
Wow.
It's it's just so disturbing, and this sort of stuff is going on far too often. And so we're having conversations with these people as to how we can work together to do that. And one of the first things we're doing is, let's get you on the podcast and let's talk about that. And so us and them are talking about something that's very, very important, and something we all have a passion for. And so by finding that really common topic to have the conversation about, there's no resistance in them sharing that conversation through their networks, through their socials, through their database, that creates awareness for us. So, and we're doing the same for them. So having that central purpose with the people you're talking to, I think has made a lot of sense to us, and people are just lining up to jump onto this podcast that doesn't exist yet. But
Yeah. I mean,
bang.
Entrepreneurship 101, right? Like, say yes and then build it, I suppose, is always the plan. And I love how it's all coming together, because it is the right time. It seems like it, like the topic that you're talking about is so important. And I already have a couple of guests that I think would be perfect for the show, from an angle of help with a mental health aspect. But then when I started to break down what you're doing, right? So you're being kind of the hub for builders in Australia, and you're kind of being the center around a topic that is not being spoken about enough, and you're being the voice and the champion for that, and ultimately that's going to lead them to have better state of mind, which leads them to have a better business, which leads to them being open to be coached. Am I right in sort of breaking that down?
Yeah. I mean, it's all part of the process. That if there is just something that is pressing on you so badly, you can have the best advice, best direction in the world right in front of your face, but you just can't pay any attention to it. It's it's like if you were in the water drowning and you can't get a breath, and I'm trying to get you to relax, because when you relax you can slow your heart rate down and you don't need as much oxygen and you won't drown as quickly. You're probably not going to listen to me because you're just so panicked, and something else is pressing on you so much you can't listen to reason. And that's what I'm seeing in the industry, and also the importance of conversations. And that's why the podcast is such an important medium to put your message out on, because the importance of conversations within the industry is going to be the answer to fixing the majority of the problems that are in the industry, because everyone's in their own little silo. So you've got the building designers and architects in theirs, and you've got the different trades in theirs, and the suppliers in theirs, and the builder in theirs, and everyone's just struggling to try and do the best they can for their own business, not realizing that how they're running their business is causing problems for all of those other businesses that are in the industry. And so we need to start to get conversations going between all of these different parts of the industry, so they can start to go, oh, I didn't realize how I was doing things was causing problems for you. I'll stop doing it that way. We'll come up with a better way of doing it. And then potentially they will change how they're doing things that are causing problems for this business and other businesses. So conversations are so incredibly vital. And I cannot think of a better medium than a podcast to have these conversations on.
Hearing you talk, you sound like a younger version of me. And it's kind of cool to see how that has evolved.
How does that work? because I think I'm older than you. Does that work mathematically?
That's why I said it the way I said it. Is so that it kind of is a it's twisted sense of time and a warped sense of space. So, but it just sounds like the things that I was saying a lot earlier on in my career. But it's such a cool way to see how podcasting has evolved, and it's like getting to a point where it's here. I want to talk about the mistake for a second and come back to you, because you probably have something to say about this. And then I also want to get any tips and tricks and ideas that you have for podcasters. So let me get to the mistake first. So today's mistake, ladies and gentlemen, is number 60, and we've compiled a list of mistakes that business owners make with their podcast, primarily because when you're a business owner, you're learning to be a podcaster. And if you're already a podcaster, chances are you're learning to be a business owner, and you're trying to make that work. So the reason for the mistakes is because we are kind of one or the other, and even if we are both, we are one dominant than the other. So having a list of these mistakes and slowly correcting them is a good idea to actually getting your podcast to the next level. So go and download those mistakes. You can get them at mistakes.wearepodcast.com, and that's where you get your copy. But today is number 60, which is selling services your audience doesn't want, and or selling only one way to work with you. And again, selling only one way to work with you is fine if you have a lot of audience and you're kind of very particular and you have very picky about how you want to work with your people. Amy Porterfield is a great example of that. She only has one way of working, and that's the way you work with her, and that's the end of that. But she's put a lot into her system. She's got a big audience. She's worked extremely hard on her brand. But when you're starting out, at least, or you're growing your business, selling your services and having multiple ways that you can deliver the same outcome is a really good idea. Because usually, like when you think about an airplane, we all want to get from one place to the other by using the airplane. I want to get from Brisbane to LA, but I can choose how I want the journey to look like. I can go, economy, I can go business, I can go first, I can have a private jet, go by steamer boat. I don't know whether that still exists, but what I'm trying to say is you can pick your journey, and depending on who your client is, they will pick how they want that journey to occur. So first of all, having different ways that they can get the transformation that you deliver through your business is a good idea. And the second thing is, which is probably the most important thing, is making sure that whatever you're selling, your audience actually wants. Because sometimes we have this idea of what we want to sell, and we kind of sell it to the wrong audience, or we sell it to the right audience and it's not what they want. So actually figuring out something that overlaps with your expertise is always a good idea. And that usually happens from having conversations with your people. Mick, I'm curious to know what you see as mistakes that people make when it comes to selling to their audience.
The big one is what you just mentioned, that they see a problem, they have a solution to the problem, and then they put it in front of the person, their prospect or their market, in a manner that it's from their perspective. Mm-hmm. And they make the mistake of not figuring out what's going on for their ideal prospect. So a couple of things that they don't identify who their ideal prospect is first, because you can't really do the second bit, which is understanding them, until you've identified your ideal prospect first. Because just the age thing, like when you're creating an avatar for your ideal prospect, what I've always been taught is pick an age and maybe even pick a sex. I know that's all a hot topic right now, but yeah. You know what I mean? So if we just look at the age thing for a moment, if someone says, our ideal customer is in the age group between 35 and 50, or even 35 and 45, having been all three of those ages in the past, your life your preferences and your priorities are extraordinarily different between 35 and 45. They're extraordinarily different between 35 and 40. They're very different between 45 and 50. So getting very, very clear on who your ideal prospect is first is really important, because then you can start to understand what is keeping them up at night. What is the conversation that they're already having inside their own mind, so you can enter into it with your topics and your conversations on your podcast and your messaging and so on and so forth. A very good friend of mine, one of my very first mentors, when I woke up that fateful morning deciding that life insurance was a really great idea, helped me run one of our intensives just a couple of weeks ago up at the Gold Coast. And he was helping our people understand. He had this saying that said, get in their bed, get in their head, which caused a bit of a chuckle when he first said it, because people didn't really understand what he was talking about. But what he meant by that is the conversation that's going around in somebody's head when they first wake up of a morning. They're kind of lying in bed and or they're falling to sleep. That's gold. That what's going on in their mind at those two times in their day are generally really, really important to them. And if your messaging and your topics and your conversations in your podcasting and your marketing is entering into the conversations that they're having in their bed, it really resonates with them, and so they will lean into it. They will sit up and take notice of what you're talking about, because it resonates with them. It will seem like it's very, very important to them. So you start to attract the exact right person into your podcast, and therefore into your business if you do it that way. But if you just have a solution to a problem that you observe, there's a fair chance that it'll be a really, really hard sell, because number one, they might not have accepted or realized that they have that problem. They experience the potentially the problems that problem creates, like they feel frustrated, or they feel like they waste their time, or whatever it is. But they haven't put two and two together and haven't identified what the problem is. So they're not even searching for your solution. So you can talk about it all you like. It's just not going to connect. We've got to get, as Ian said, in their bed, get in their head, understand what their priorities and preferences are, and enter into that conversation.
Yeah. So cool. Before we wind up, what kind of tricks and tips you might have for like someone starting a podcast or is new to the podcasting world? What sort of advice would you give someone?
Don't do it how I did it. The first one. That's a really, really tough question, because I feel like just this week I got all of this new information that's been given to me for the last 2 years probably, about really what is the purpose of your podcast? Like really and genuinely, what is the purpose of your podcast? So you can then start to think about what I just talked about. Who's your ideal listener, and so on and so forth. So I think that planning its purpose, planning its structure, and just getting into really understanding the purpose and the structure up front is the most important thing that you could do. Because it was only, I don't know, was it yesterday? I know it was this week.
Yeah, yesterday.
You were asking me all these questions, and I said, yeah, I know. Yep, I know. Yeah, I know that. Yeah, I know that. And then you put this whole lot of stuff in front of me, and I went, oh, shit, I don't know any of that. And all of that stuff was more important than the stuff I already knew. So structure, purpose. If we can go back to a mistake, you've probably covered that before, that what sort of equipment do I get and all of that sort of stuff. And I'm just mad with all of that sort of stuff. And it's the least important,
Yeah.
really,
Yeah. You were you
in the
were
whole
you were
disaster.
you were on the coaching call when I fixed someone's problem with because they didn't have a good microphone,
Mm.
literally on the spot, because she didn't need anything fancy. She literally could record off Zoom off her phone with the iPhone plug. So I think we get too fancy with the equipment, but and I love that you said it because you're like pretty you're pretty anal when it comes to audio.
Thank you very much.
I don't know whether you're anal, otherwise I'm just joking. Anyway, let me wind up on this. Where can people find you, and where can people find your work?
Our website is buildersbusinessblackbelt.com.au. You can jump on the App Store or Google Play and find the Tool Shed. So if you're involved in the construction industry, we're trying to create an environment for anybody and everybody in the construction industry, so we can start to have these conversations, make everybody's businesses better. But that's the website, buildersbusinessblackbelt.com.au.
Amazing. Mick, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for everything, being a great case study as always, and keeping on the good fight. So I'm extremely lucky to have you in my life, and extremely lucky to see your journey, however young you might look. So thank you.
Thank you, and back at you. I mean, from when we first met, and you were the podcast guru, I thought, oh, that's nice for runs. I didn't think that there was any value in it for me, and all I can say standing here today is there's been so much value in it for me, and it has affected so many other people's lives because we do a podcast. Don't underestimate the power of it.
So good to hear that. Thank you, Mick. Talk soon.